Welcome to mindyourhealthcast.com. Several months ago, I did a kind of an abbreviated video related to immunization, vaccinations, and the two are not the same. It was because the flu-threatened epidemic and the fact that there was a big push for everybody to become vaccinated. So I just kind of brought out some of the basic material about it, and I don't know if it was very convincing one way or the other to people, but at least I let it be known that there was more than one idea about it. But now, all of a sudden, vaccination has become a big issue again, and periodically it happens. It's a very highly emotionally charged issue, and at least, well, sometimes both sides, but it seems that those that are pro-vaccination get real hysterical almost sometimes about it, and are accusing people who don't want to do it as being stupid, ignorant, irresponsible, etc., etc. Of course, to me, name-calling never solves any issue. What it means is, if you have a lot of arguments for your position, then you present your arguments. If you don't have arguments to prove your position, then you talk in generalities and spend most of your time insulting the other side. And that's one of the ploys that sometimes people use when they don't or cannot substantiate their position. Not necessarily that there's no information, but because they personally don't have it, and hence they are kind of put in a corner, and what's left is we'll just attack the other person. And that way we can outshout them and insult them enough that they just might go away. And some people might be persuaded because you're so adamant about your position that you kind of think that you have prevailed. Now, the material that I'm going to offer is, I want to give some basic observations first, or some preliminary statements, because it is a very complex, and I mean complex, field, and there are so many issues that have over the years kind of come together within the realm of the field, and so many motivations and issues related to those motivations that sometimes there's such a cloud of dust that it's hard to get through to core facts. And basically, to make a good decision, you have to have facts. And where there are facts, we're going to talk about it. And however, as I say, there's a lot of emotional opinions, and to me that is not an argument for or an argument against. It's just a very demonstrative presentation of your position, and whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. That's what it amounts to. Now, I have to say, I'm going to prefix my presentation on the fact that these are my opinions based on my findings over many, many years of digging and studying. I'm sure they represent a few thousand hours at least of reading, searching, talking to, investigating every piece of information that I could about the subject. Now, when I first started looking into it, the internet was not available, and a lot of the material was hard to find. There weren't a tremendous amount of books, And because it was such an emotionally charged issue, some companies weren't willing to put out any information or publish or print any information that would run contrary to the current position taken by most people. And I'd have to say that years ago, the very small minority of people who were opposing, and they were getting no exposure, no press, and still don't, other than to say there's a bunch of stupid loons out there that think you shouldn't be immunized, because of course everybody knows that you must be immunized, and everybody knows that it's been scientifically proven. And you know, when you hear something like that, hardly anything is absolutely scientifically proven. Now, the preponderance of the known evidence might be on one side or the other, but very, very few issues are ever absolute except death. I guess if the person has quit breathing and their heart isn't beating and there's no brain waves coming out, and within 2 or 3 days the body starts a deterioration process where it's going to start decomposing back to the dust, I say that one's probably pretty absolute. But apart from that, now of course I read of a case where somebody had been embalmed and brought back to life. Anyhow, whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. But I did see a video on it, and it was relatively convincing. Except I don't know the people personally, so unless I investigate it myself, I can only tell you that it looked convincing, what I saw. With this subject, anything that involves children especially is emotionally charged. It just always is. And now, you know, it's when I say the people who oppose it, they're not stupid in many cases, as you're going to find. What I wanted to do over this period of time, I want to give you enough information that you can at least know where to go to find more, and you can at least get to look at both sides. Now, I did run across an interesting book that is available now as a free download. At least I was able to get it as a free download. It's called Don't Vaccinate Before You Educate. And of course it's written by Buster Higgs from Southern Tennessee. No, that's not what. It is written by a gentleman by the name of Mayer Eisenstein, MD, JD, MPH. Okay. Now, that means he's not only was trained and worked as a medical doctor, he also had attended and graduated from law school, so he knows something about law. And he also has a master's degree in public health. So I would say that at the very least, he's far from being an ignoramus who doesn't know anything. He's someone that not only was taught to understand something about medicine, but he also was taught to understand the law, and he also was taught a lot about the principles of public health, of which, of course, vaccinations would fall under. So it's a good book, and you can look for it on the internet. That's where I got it, called Don't Vaccinate Before You Educate. His whole hypothesis is there's a lot of material on the two sides, and it's difficult because if you want to believe something, of course, it's easy to grab onto and to present only the material to substantiate your side, and to accuse everyone who brings in opposing materials as being at the very least deceptive, one-sided, none-thinking, you know, things like that get thrown about. So, This is my position. My position is I am now convinced as I can be of anything, that the detriment far outweighs the potential benefit. I can say that from the beginning. Hence, what I'm going to present to you is a lot of the against the vaccinations, not because I want to absolutely convince you, but number one, to show you there is a lot on that side, and that the people who take those positions are far from being uneducated and ignorant and stubborn and belligerent and all the things that they're accused of being. And the pro-vaccinators would have you believe that anybody who has any sense and is scientific would agree. I recently heard a TV show commentator that I've watched the show a lot of times take the very definite, hard-nosed position. I vaccinated my kids because all the scientific evidence has proven it to be accurate and true and effective and blah, blah, blah. And even brought on her program an MD who is a pro-vaccinator, who unfortunately is not up to speed with the information that's out, and did not bring up the controversy involving the CDC and a phonied report and so forth, which has been blacked out of the news, unfortunately. And of course I can understand that issue, is that the major networks derive a huge pile of their income from advertising from the pharmaceutical interests, and hence are not too inclined to allow material coming on that's going to be offensive to the people who are providing the very thick layer of butter for their bread. So you are not likely on major channels and TV or on major radio stations to hear too much about anything on the con side of the issue, with the exception of making out like these people are just not informed in what the facts are. And there's a lot of controversy, a lot of things have happened, and in recent years it's all been coming to a head. You know, I've known about all this stuff for years and years, and when people come into my office, I refer them to read and look at both sides, but of course there's more out there saying, yeah, you should do it, and my feeling is you should look at as much of the information as you can find, and then you have to make the decision, because I will not tell you don't immunize. I will tell you, as this book says, don't vaccinate before you've educated yourself. So I would say you find out as much as you can that gives you enough information that you can make your own decision. And I also say you're the one that's going to live with the outcome. And since you are going to be the one that lives with the outcome, then no one else can make that decision for you, which of course is why I'm against compulsory immunizations, because that goes against the very basis of freedom, and it's not a slam dunk issue. And since it's not, then of course why would you force somebody into doing something that's against their conscience or against their fears or against their best judgment as to what they and their family should do? And I think that was part of the Constitution, as people refer to, and I know that the courts have held that, at least the appellate courts. I know in Texas several years ago, and I've mentioned this before, the people of Texas, a lot of states were licensing Oriental medicine which includes acupuncture. And there is so much bad information or incomplete information. It's always frustrating to me. You know, it's not, acupuncture is a form of medicine. Acupuncture is a therapeutic aspect of the realm of Oriental medicine. So Chinese Oriental medicine includes a lot more. It includes acupuncture. It includes acupressure, which is done without needles. It includes electroacupuncture, which is electrostimulation of acupoints without needles. It includes electrostimulation of needles once inserted. In particular, that is used in surgery where they want to do analgesia without putting the person out with an anesthetic. It can be done with needles that are electrostimulated. And it includes herbs, selected not on the same basis as we normally think of herbs, but on the basis of energetics, and food and diet, exercise, meditation, meaning to learn how to deal with stress, and so forth. And there's some emergency aspects of it, bone setting and restoring a dislocated joint and things of that nature. So it's a system, a whole system of medicine. And so acupuncture is not a good description, it's only a piece of the information. And I get frustrated because, oh, you're an acupuncturist, which means, well, you know how to put some needles in somebody, but you don't really know medicine. Well, see, that's not accurate. Modern Oriental medicine, as per in Florida, includes the diagnosis and treatment according to traditional and modern forms of Chinese medicine. And it means that you can treat all kinds of illnesses and diagnosis, and they are listed as a primary healthcare provider, meaning the first person you can go to when you're sick and have anticipation that you can receive a meaningful treatment for a resolution of your problem. And so the same thing is true with this subject that we're talking about, which is vaccination. You know, it's a complex subject. There's a lot of aspects of it. There's a lot of motivation and drivers behind it. Now, what I'm going to do with this, and it's going to be at least 2 to 3 sessions, I don't know how I can get around that. What I wanted to do is to lay the foundation with this first one and discuss some of the implications and some of the resources you can go to on your own, and then go into more particular details. You know, right from the beginning, one of the basic things is safety and effectiveness. Okay, so that's ultimately what the two schools of thought, for and against, get down to. Those who are for it claim that scientifically it's been proven that immunizations are safe and effective. Okay, so those are the two aspects, safe and effective. If they're not effective and there's a chance they could be a problem, then that's an issue. If they could be effective, but they have a lot of serious adverse issues involved, that could be a problem. So it's, as I say, it's not that simple, but it goes beyond that because there's other drivers in the background. My feeling is that certain things that take place become suspect to me and starts me looking in more depth. You know, if something doesn't quite set right or it doesn't seem to fit. For example, as I say, I've been studying this pushing 40 years. And it's been many, many years when I came to the conclusion that I would not vaccinate my children, and I would not recommend that children be vaccinated. But I wouldn't tell people if after studying all the issues they chose to, that they did not have the right. They should. They have the right to make those decisions and do those vaccinations. So I'm not here to convince anybody one way or the other. What I am here to convince you of is to get as much of the facts as you can first, because once you do it, it's not reversible in some cases, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And so if it does lead to a problem, and the problem can be severe, then you may want to take that into consideration as part of your risk. And I have a feeling by now I can kind of determine who would probably be the most risk. Now, medicine would tell you, regular medicine, that there are a few cases where they would suggest it be postponed, but very few that they would say don't ever do it. They might say, well, you know, if you're having at the moment a flu or a cold, I would not do these immunizations. But not to say they're not for them and think that you absolutely should do them. They do. They have that opinion. Now, I have observed a lot of things. I've observed a lot of people over the years who have been vaccinated and developed severe problems. And I've noted a lot of people who developed problems that are lifetime, meaning the parents have to try to deal with issues from that for the rest of their natural life. And of course the kids, that as they grow up throughout their life, they have to deal with it. So there are issues. And so whenever somebody thinks by just making a sweeping statement like this personality did on TV, which I kind of like to listen to her program, but I thought that she went way overboard, inferring that anybody was stupid who didn't vaccinate, because it's been scientifically absolutely established that is not true. And that bringing one pro-doctor on who's her friend and saying, yeah, that's right, it's absolutely been proven, and also saying that an issue that came up, that a doctor they tried to ruin his career because he suggested in a written paper, peer-reviewed, he suggested that it needed further examination or study, who lost his license and went on the world press how awful this guy was, that he was dishonest, blah, blah, blah. Now the evidence has come out that they were totally off the wall, that he was lied about, and that the person who perpetrated all this against him was actually, even though they were on the British Medical Journal as a reporter, they lied, and that they are on the payroll with Merck, the company who makes the vaccine that was in question. Now talk about dishonesty, there's the real dishonesty. But see, the people who heard that in the first place but have not followed the story don't know the whole story, and so to make out like he was a crazy guy and he was stupid and he didn't know what he was doing, even though he was a trained medical doctor in pediatric gastroenteritis. He was a gastroenterologist. You know, they tried to destroy him because he dared to suggest that there might be a connection. He never even said there was, and he wasn't even reporting his own information. So anyhow, the doctor who came on, he alluded to it like, yep, yeah, he didn't know what he was doing, he was crazy, blah, and he doesn't know all the details. I know all the details because I followed it up, because when I hear something that sounds out of order, I'm not going to rest until every bit of evidence that is available, that is obtainable, that I can obtain before I make my decision about it. And it's interesting that what this doctor said meant to me, he never bothered to follow it up and know all the details. He's shooting off the cuff, so to speak, without bothering to go investigate it personally. You know, you can hear all kinds of things. And you can hear all kinds of things said by people who ought to know something, whether they do or not. And so I I'm going to give you that material and the resources to find it. I don't want you to take it. Remember, I've said this many times. I don't want you to believe it because I said it. I want to say it and provoke you that if it's a subject of serious interest, that you can go and find out for yourself and make your own decision. But I want to make sure that you are aware that there is more than what you've been told. I can say with absolute assurity that efficacy and effectiveness have not been scientifically absolutely proven beyond a doubt. That's not true. There are some things that suggest that they may be true, but not absolute. I mean, I know when something is an absolute fact. And as I said, there's not a whole lot of things that are absolute facts. But in this case, it's particularly serious because it involves kids, number one, and because if some of the things I'm telling you are true, and some I have observed with my own eyes, so when I see it myself, I don't care what people's opinions are. If I see it, I know what I saw. And so I know that it's not absolute. But that's going to be your decision. But as I said, I want to give you enough information so that you can look into it. Now, you can go to Amazon, and there's a pile of books out there on it going all the way back for years, well, many, many years. I'm just thinking of the more recent ones, but I have material going way back to the early 1800s. Because, remember I've said before, I've searched medicine, drugs, health, sickness, soil, nutrition, all of that for the last 200 plus years, and in some cases go back even further. So I have a lot of information that you'll probably not run into, and unless you knew how to find it, you probably wouldn't find it. Unless you knew what the subject would be that you would want to look for to find it, it will be difficult. But I'm not even going to go back that far. There's ample material in the more recent history that cite some of the early stuff enough that can get you going. And it's probably not something you're going to do in one evening and settle in your own mind. But I certainly want to give you, as I say, the resources. Amazon has a pile of books. One of the best books, and this is one I have suggested to patients when they ask me, I said, well, number one, if you ask my opinion, I personally wouldn't do it. I can tell you that right out. However, I've reached my decision based on having investigated it for a long, long time, but I'm saying to you, you should look into some of the data. Now, you don't have to do that many years because, as I say, it's become a current issue, and therefore, a lot of people have studied it in depth again and published a lot about it. And I think you're going to find, if you don't know and you do even a cursory examination, you're going to find two things, as I said. Number one, we're talking about MDs, DOs, PhDs, researchers, people that know a little bit about thinking and medicine and the body and the immune system and the history of vaccines and what they do, what they potentially can and can't do, and so forth. I mean, as I say, you're going to find that it's not just some off-the-wall person who doesn't like it, you know, with a plaid shirt on and a hunting cap and 30-30 hanging in the back window of your pickup. And I say that not to put people down who want to that's their lifestyle, but to say that I saw one time a TV survey that people were supposed to dial in and vote, and they had the person in favor of what they were advocating dressed in a nice suit and tie and white shirt, their clean-shaven hair in perfect order, and they were for it. And then the guy who was against it had about a 7-day growth of beard, was wearing a hunting cap and a plaid shirt, and had a pickup truck beside him with the traditional 30-30 hanging in the back window, and he was the one who was against what they were advocating. And so you were supposed to call in and say, yeah, I am for this issue that you're backing, after having seen these two guys make their presentation. The one with the suit and tie was very smooth-spoken, very educated, very eloquent in the way he made his presentation. The other guy, his English was a bit on the rough side. He had a southern type of way of speaking, and he didn't make a whole lot of sense, the information that he was throwing out, other than it was his opinion. And anyhow, we don't want to do that. We want you to know that people on both sides are learned people. Now, it doesn't mean because you have a PhD that you can't ever make a mistake, because a lot of them do, and it doesn't mean because you're an MD or DO you don't make mistakes, but a lot of them do. But what you will find that there's those type of people on both sides. There's researchers, as I mentioned, this one that says don't vaccinate before you educate. Here's a guy who's spent years in school, not only learning medicine, but law, and then going on and getting a master's degree in public health, which very much involves itself with immunization or vaccination. And I guess we should clarify this deal about immunization, vaccination. Vaccinate, just the process of giving somebody a stick with a needle, or having them drink something, or in some way putting it into their body. That's to vaccinate. Now, whether they're actually immunized, which means they've got an immune response and so forth, that's a different story. And because you do vaccinate does not of necessity mean you've really been immunized, because it may not have done anything, or it may have created some problems worse than what you were using or going to utilize it for. So it's easy. So I try to remember that I call it vaccination, because that's accurate. That's what's going on. You're being vaccinated with a vaccine. And whether or not that vaccine is effective or safe or both or neither is another story. Now, this little book called Vaccines, Are They Really Safe and Effective? Is written by a gentleman who has done some of the most intensive research in the last several years. Now, when I say several years, probably 20 years maybe or more. And he has been on television and having a debating discussion with MDs and researchers and other people, and he seems to be able to hold himself up in a good way and make a good presentation for what he has uncovered. And I think the facts he's uncovered are pretty indisputable as far as facts. Now, as far as the conclusions you draw from those facts, that's up to the individual. But this one, if you just want to get an introduction to the whole idea, and he continually updates it. This is called the New Updated and Revised Edition, but I don't know if it's, the last. There may have been another one out. And if so, you could get it through Amazon, and I would look for the latest edition you can find. This one was the updated and revised edition from the original. I had the original, then they've had this one, but for some reason I think there is another recent, because as more and more information becomes available, then he goes back and adds it to this book. So what this does, it kind of goes through the history of vaccines and vaccination, and talks about some of the statistics that are thrown about, and of some of the statistics that are ignored. And I say that because what you're going to find is that there's a way of presenting something. As I've mentioned before, I have this little book called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's not meant to say, okay, here's how you can go use some statistics and lie and make use of that lie. What it's saying is statistics can be used in a dishonest way, and here is some information to help you to be better able to discern for yourself whether the statistic is saying what you are being told that it is saying. Because you can throw a graph up on the wall and show some lines going up or down, and then you can say it means this or that. But there's some things you have to know when you look at that. Is that really saying what this person is saying it's saying? Because graphs are kind of like that. They sometimes are very pretty, and they can be ornate, they can be done in a fascinating way, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, it may not prove what the person presenting the graph is trying to get you to believe. But just because it's a pretty graph with a lot of nice lines going up and down, like I say, it could be totally wrong. And that little book, and it's still available as far as I know, and it's called How to Lie with Statistics, and it's not a big book, but it does kind of equip you that when you start looking at graphs, because when you get into looking at the vaccination issue, you're going to find that a lot of people are presenting a lot of graphs. And so when you look at that up close and personal, does it say what the presenter is saying? Look at this is what it proves. But the book is good because it gives you a little bit better view of the process of making a vaccine, what is included in a vaccine, ingredient-wise, and what has been known about the vaccine since it was put on the market. And some of the things you're going to find out you probably maybe might not want to know, in a sense, because the fact is that they are scary, to say the least, when you read about it. Now, I just noticed on this particular book, as I said, I've had this available for patients. I've even carried it in the office so that they wouldn't have to go out and even try to buy it if it was now an issue for them and they were in a position where they needed to make a decision. Then I said, well, you know the other position. You know the arguments that they are safe and effective, and so see what you think after you read this book. Now, on the back, he has true or false. Hepatitis B vaccine may cause multiple sclerosis and autoimmune disorders. The chickenpox vaccine is manufactured in human fetal tissue. The MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine may cause autism, brain damage, and death. Now, that is what he is raising the question. Are those statements true or false? Now, I know the answer. And I know the answer all too well on one of these. I'll tell you in a moment, because I want you to just start thinking that probably everything you've been told is not accurate, that there's a lot of hearsay. When somebody uses a broad sweeping statement, well, science has proven, that doesn't mean squat to me. What's the scientist? When did he prove it? How did he prove it? Let me see the data. I want to see on what basis that decision was reached. There's very few things, as I say, that are that clear cut. And so I think you need to whet your logic capabilities, and you need to learn a bit, as I say, about reading graphs and pie sections and all of that first. If you say 33% of the people experienced some improvement when they took this, and then you go back and find that the total population was 3 people, and that certain circumstances eliminated 2 of those, that meaning 2 of the 3 did not get the response you want, but the third person did seem to improve a little for whatever reason, then that's 1/3, 33%. So you can use that figure and throw it out. Well, 33% received such and such. Wow. That 33% was represented by 1 person. And there's a lot of variables that could take place why that person did or did not respond in a certain way. And number 2, I would want to know who carried out the experiment, what their connection was, were they being paid to do it. In other words, more data before you could say that it absolutely proves anything. And so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of whetting your appetite to start the thought process. I would get the book, How to Lie with Statistics, and look into it. It's not a difficult book, and it's not a bunch of math. It's just showing you, okay, here's some graphs. Now you look at the graph, the way it's presented, and look at the numbers, the way they're on the scale, and you see if it really is saying what they're making it say, or trying to make it say. Now, on this book, when he says the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine may cause autism, brain damage, and death, I know that sounds awfully dramatic. But you know what? I know of it personally. I'll just throw this in right now, because I want to get you, they can scare you, all measles are terrible, and they are not terrible, but they're at the very least uncomfortable. But I had the measles when I was young, and I'm still alive, many, many years since then. I had the mumps when I was young. I had the chicken pox when I was young. I had the whooping cough when I was young. It wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't that bad. In fact, the mumps, one morning my sister and I, she was 3 years younger than me, but her and I always seemed to get both of these at the same time, and I guess it's because we went to the same school and were exposed to the same people, even though we weren't in the same class. It seemed that one morning we got up, and my mother was going to get us ready for school, and she looked at us, and she said, I think I'm going to keep you home today. And we thought, wow, we feel fine. That'd be fun. And so, a little later, she went in and she baked this pan of oatmeal raisin cookies. And after they cooled a bit, she came back in and she handed each of us one and said, here, have a nice fresh baked oatmeal raisin cookie. And I remember I put it in my mouth and I took one bite and started to chew, and I felt the most terrible pain in the 2 sides of my jaws. And my sister did the same thing, and my mother said, just as I thought, you had the mumps. And so we went through the mumps process. It wasn't particularly miserable as far as I was concerned, and I guess not hers either, because we stayed home and played while we had the mumps. Now, they would scare you with that, oh, those terrible mumps. And what it is, it's an inflammation of the parotid glands, the salivary glands, and they do puff up. They look kind of funny. It looks like a chipmunk that's got their mouth full of nuts, and how they sometimes pop way out. And that's what they look like. But in a short period of time, it began to clear up, and we never were incapacitated with it. And I remember the red measles, and I remember the whooping cough. I remember my mother and dad coming to bed where I was lying in bed in the morning and looking, and my dad says, yep, he's got the chicken pox. And so I remember going through the chicken pox. And so, that was common. Pretty much all the people that we knew went through the same issues. And I don't recall of any of them getting deathly sick or dying, and we had a pile of neighbors, friends, relatives, and so forth that all went through all these things. And I never saw any of them have any serious after effects, and they weren't what I would call dramatically sick when they had it. So I'm not saying that it never happens to anybody, but we went through it fine, and unfortunately I didn't take those vaccines because they weren't even available to begin with, at least where we were. Now, I think smallpox was out there, and I did get smallpox later when we moved to a large city. The school said we needed to have it. I don't know that they said I couldn't go if I didn't have it, but they said we needed to have it, and my parents were not rebels. They took us to get it. And see, at that point, we all grew up believing, no, you can survive all those, but if this vaccine is safe and it doesn't create a problem, and, then there's no problem with the vaccine. So I wasn't raised against the vaccine. I didn't need it because I'd already had those things, but it was not an issue for me. And when I first got into the health field, I still had brought that feeling with me that, well, it sounds like a good idea. I don't need it, but it might be a good thing to do. And so I wasn't negative to it. I guess there was not enough out about it other than the doctors were all saying, oh yeah, it's good, it'll keep you from getting all these things. And that's kind of the way it was presented. And so once I got into the health field and had patients raise the question, then it became a question to me, and I didn't want to just throw out the party line without looking into it. I thought that would be unfair to my patients. So my response was, I will give it some study, and I'll tell you what my findings are, and then maybe you can be better able to make a decision, because now some of these books and so forth that I'm talking about, they certainly weren't out 40 years ago. So they weren't available to refer people to. And it wasn't a big issue anyhow. I mean, nobody was raising any great concerns. But what I started to find out is that there were a lot of people who did have some problems with the vaccines, but it was something that didn't get talked about too much. And so I'm going to tell you about this one right now, just so that you can see what I'm talking about. When I read this, I'm sure some of you said, oh, come on. MMR causing autism, brain damage, death. I got a call from a family in another city here in Florida, and the lady calling said, we want to bring our son over. I don't know if you can help him or not, but we would like you to look at him and see what you think. And here was the story. He was in school, and he was a sports figure in school. He was very large, not fat, but very muscular, and he was in football, and he was coming up to graduation, had 2 weeks left to graduate, and he was planning to go into college and get into college sports. And so 2 weeks before he's going to graduate, the principal calls him in and sits down. He says, I've been looking over your records, and I see that you did not get your MMR booster shot. And I'm not going to allow you to graduate from high school if you do not get it. And so he goes home and he tells his parents, and they're quite irritated about it. And they called the principal and said, now come on. He's got 2 weeks and he's going to be graduating. Why do you care whether he's immunized or not now anyhow? Well, that's my decision. He has to get the immunization or I will not allow him to graduate. And so they go out and call their doctor and go in, and they give him the injection of the MMR vaccine. And within a few hours that evening, he developed a fever. He started to get very lethargic. And as the night progressed into the next day, he had now encephalitis, went into a coma, and began to waste away. And in a few weeks, Actually, I think another 2 or 3 weeks after they brought him to see me, they brought him in the back seat of their car. He was unconscious. And at that point, the damage was so great, it didn't look to me like that. Probably, I said, well, I'll give you a couple things. If he responds to that, maybe we could, undo some of the damage. He didn't, and I said I don't want to hold up too much hope because he's very far along with the damage from the vaccine. And so I heard in another couple of weeks or something like that he died. And then I didn't hear anything for quite some time, and then I received a subpoena for the records from me because the family was bringing a suit. I never did find out what happened from it. I gave them the notes of what I had about it, and I didn't hear about it. But yes, I know that it's not an exaggeration, and there's many more too. But that's one of the extremes. And I know that had he not taken that vaccine, that I don't know, I can't say he'd be alive today, but I certainly would know he would have graduated and probably gone on to college. And he didn't pick up encephalitis from some other person because there was no encephalitis around. And he was perfectly healthy and doing fine until he got that vaccination. And so I've seen some other things too related that came on fast. Now this says cause autism brain damage. I had some people call from me from New York who brought down a son who at that point was about 10 or 11 years old. He could not communicate, he couldn't talk, he couldn't hear, and he couldn't see, and he was pretty much unable to move much. And so I inquired, what had happened, how did he get to that position? And she said, I took him to the doctor's office to get a vaccination, and they gave him the vaccination. And before we left the doctor's office, he suddenly started crying and screaming. And he continued to go downhill with encephalitis. And it wiped out his hearing, it wiped out his vision, and basically immobilized him so that he basically could just lay and do nothing. And so that's two that I know from the MMR vaccine personally, that this man who wrote this book is not exaggerating, and I'm just mentioning a few of the cases. Now, if you're the person who takes the vaccine and you seemingly get through it okay, that's great. But if you're the person that it doesn't come out right, and there is an adverse event, which is what they refer to it, an adverse reaction or an adverse event, there's a lot more to all this, and I'm giving you some of the basic stuff to begin with because there is, well, let me go back. Back several years ago, when it became apparent that the vaccine manufacturers were pumping out more vaccines and that they had convinced a lot of people that they were necessary to take, they suddenly went to the federal government and said, we want to get you to pass a law that we're not liable for any, since you're now pushing the vaccines and requiring a lot of people to take them, we want you to pass a law that we're not liable for any damage related to the vaccines. That means, such as the kid that died with the encephalitis from the vaccine, and the kid who was left blinded and immobile and hearing impaired, you can't sue the manufacturer. And so the federal government did that. They in essence, made them non-liable for any damage from the vaccines. Now, remember I said earlier that sometimes things come up that you find out about that right away makes you suspect. Now, if I'm putting out a product that I'm absolutely convinced is safe, You think I'm going to try to get a law passed that anybody buys it can't sue me if they're damaged by it? You know, just logically, why would they do that if they are absolutely convinced that they're safe? So right away, as I said, that was suspect. But as I've looked and gained more and more experience, I know that that's not quite true. Now, does everybody have an adverse event that takes the vaccine? Well, not known. Because the other thing that I have found out, that sometimes down the road, it takes a while before the effects become apparent. And so that's why so many cases don't get reported, because the proximity isn't close enough. But the type of problem that has arisen, I can tell whether or not it would have been a vaccine type problem or something that just happened. And in some cases you can't tell, because it's true, it's too far away. But when it happens the same day or sometime within the same hour of the vaccination, and there's been no previous problems, and the person had no health problems that were known, then I would say the preponderance of evidence is that it was a problem. Okay, so now you can't sue the vaccine manufacturer. So what is your redress? Well, they established a special court in Washington, D.C. It's a U.S. Court of Claims. And if you have a suspected injury or death from a vaccine, called an adverse event, it supposedly is to be reported by doctors, but they don't always do it. I read one time from the CDC that they said that probably only 1 in 10 adverse event ever gets reported. They're supposed to report it, especially if it happens right away. But more often than not, the doctor will say, well, it must be something else. It couldn't have been the vaccine because they're safe. And so I would say that we're probably only getting about 10% of the cases reported. However, this Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., you have to take your case there, and you have to prove, if you're going to get any kind of settlement, you have to prove pretty substantially that there's a causal relationship exists. And in civil courts, which is what this is, it's always the preponderance of evidence is what makes the determination. Now, in this court, there's no jury. It's more like a referee or a person of that nature. It's not necessarily a regular judge. And so you have to prove to him that you have a case. But there's a cap on the awards, meaning they're only going to give you a certain amount of money if there's permanent disability or death or whatever. There is a certain amount they'll pay, and that's it. So that's all you can do. Now, as I say, it's very difficult to prove because a lot of people didn't anticipate it and wouldn't believe that they think something else happened, so they don't even report it. And sometimes it takes a while before they begin to think, now wait a minute, when I look back, my child was doing fine, they were developing fine, there was no problems. Now all of a sudden they get a vaccination, and within a day or 2 or 3, all of a sudden this terrible stuff happens. And so anyhow, then they think, well, gee, maybe I do. Now, if they report it to the doctor should report that as an adverse event, but they don't always. First of all, the doctors right away want to talk it down because they get afraid that, they might be wanting to sue me. And some of them have you sign a hold harmless document before they will let you give you the immunization to begin with, but at the same time tell you you have to have it. And so one of my patients came in and said, I went to my doctor, the pediatrician, and he came into the room with this hypodermic, and I said, what's that? He said, well, that's the vaccination your child needs. And before that had happened, however, a nurse came in and said that we need to have you read and sign this. I don't even know if they said read, but we have to need you to sign this document. And it basically would hold the doctor harmless if there was any problems from the vaccination. And so she at that point objected because she wasn't sure she even wanted the vaccination, number one, and number two, she didn't like what he was trying to get her to do. So she asked me, and I said, well, it's very simple. If he's absolutely convinced that the vaccines are safe and you have nothing to worry about, then I would type up a agreement that says that he is, inasmuch as he's advocating that the child must have the vaccine and that the vaccine is totally safe, then he would not be afraid to sign a document or a contract that says if in the event the child should have an adverse reaction from the vaccine, that he would assume personal liability for all the costs involved. And so she thought that was a pretty good idea, so she typed it up, and the next time she went into his office, he came in again, and she said, well, I've given a lot of thought, and if you're absolutely sure that the vaccine is safe, if you'll just sign this agreement with me, then I'll go ahead with the vaccination. And he looked at it and threw it down and stomped out of the room, and that was kind of the end of it. But my point is, it's one thing to talk unless, you know, your money's on the line. Then it's a different story. Now, these are some personal things that I know that I'm just kind of dropping out at the beginning. And I have one more story. Because, you know, as I say, it's not always immediate. But one of my patients' grandson was 2 years old, somewhere between 2 and 3. He was walking, talking, very active, and so forth. And so her daughter took her grandson and got him one of the booster shots, the vaccine. And so the next day or so, she's over to the house, and here she sees the grandson stumbling and drooling and can't talk and acting very peculiar. And so the only thing, he didn't have a cold, didn't have a flu, nothing had happened to him, and he wasn't out running around places because he was only 2 years old. And she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, and she was kind of negative to her daughter vaccinating to begin with. But the daughter thought she was supposed to get her vaccinations. And besides, you know, a lot of the pediatricians say, well, I won't treat you if you don't do the vaccinations. And so they've kind of put the person into a bind. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they look for another pediatrician since they're not going to be forced into getting the vaccinations. And now some of the pediatricians are being pressured by advocates of vaccination that they tell their patients, we're going to drop you as a patient if you refuse the vaccinations. And so getting back to the militancy side of it and the almost hysterical aggressive side, to me that's not good dialogue. And so I'm just giving you again enough stuff to lay out a foundation for this. And so consequently, these are some of the things that I saw personally. So that kind of, you know, sealed what I had come to the conclusion anyhow. But I would say periodically, over a year, I have several people who come in and say something about the vaccinations, and I say, again, I've studied it for many years. I don't favor it, but if I were you, here's some things I would look at, and if you feel you should do it, then that's your choice. I would not talk you out of it. Okay, so there's a whole process. If you do feel you've been damaged by it, you can go through it. They call it the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And as I say, the doctors are supposed to report it. Some people, they make it an acronym, but that's what it amounts to is. And there's a process you have to go through to report it. That's one thing. But the second thing is if you then believe you have a case, then you have to get an attorney and file a claim with the U.S. Court of Claims. And as I say, in any case, the manufacturer of the vaccine is not liable. And of course, the next thing that was interesting to me is they've paid out over $1 billion, even though there's caps. There have been enough cases that were so convincing that over $1 billion has been paid out by this vaccine compensation plan. And there's several thousand cases that are pending. So that tells me that that's kind of a strong argument about the fact that they're perfectly harmless. Now, I'm saying then, if they're not perfectly harmless, then it puts it in your lap to decide, is the value of the vaccine then worth the risk that's there? Now, of course, it's obvious that everybody who gets the vaccine does not have an adverse event. So you cannot say that it's going to be automatic. If you take the vaccine, you're going to have a problem. Now, again, it's not to say that down the road it does not set in motion certain things that lead to problems, and that gets to the autism, and that's what happened to the 2-year-old kid, that he became autistic. And so that's the one of the other issues about the whole thing. And so I know personally he did, and I know that it was from that vaccine. I have no doubt. So there's a death, brain damage, and autism, the 3 things I just gave you, that I have personally seen. So I know the guy who wrote the book was not exaggerating. It does happen. Now, how much? That's another issue. And that's something you'll have to dig into because, as much as is possible, all the data is kept from all this stuff. And so there you can find out about it. Now, I do want you to go to YouTube, and there is a lady who is a very interesting lady. Her name is Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. She is also an MD. Suzanne is spelled Suzanne. She has several, but she has 2 basic videos that kind of give you her take on vaccines. Now, a little about her background. She graduated from high school, she went to college, and she studied to be in the field of physics. So when she got out of college, she worked as a researcher in the realm of physics, and after a period of time, she grew kind of tired of, she was getting bored. That would be my feeling about it. She's sitting there every day, when you carry on some of these experiments, it's a long, drawn-out thing, and you may or may not get results, or something may go wrong, you may have to set it up and redo it, and it's not real exciting. But some people enjoy it. I mean, they love, don't bother me, I want to do my research and just leave me alone and I'll be fine. But she didn't find that fulfilling, so she made a decision to go back to school and became an MD. Now, in her own words, and you'll see that if you watch her 2 basic ones on vaccination, she said that when she graduated from medical school and reflected over the whole experience, she found out 2 things. Number 1, she was now a highly trained technician for the pharmaceutical companies. That's what she said. That, again, that's her words, not mine. But you'll hear that when you watch the videos. And she said the second thing you will find out is that in medical school they don't teach doctors anything about the whole background of vaccinations and so forth. But if you're a pediatrician, when you get into your specialty, they are very emphatic that you have to insist that your patients all take these vaccines. But they are assured that they are safe and effective, so therefore they don't have to worry about it. Just take our word for it. They're safe and effective, and go out and get it. Do it. Put those drugs out there, or those vaccines. So that was the other thing she comments about. Now then she goes into detail about why she came to the conclusion that they were neither safe nor effective. And it's up to you to listen to her testimony. Let's look at some of the things that she makes reference to and see what you think about it. And see if you feel that she makes a good point with what she presents. Now, I have another one of the papers she wrote called Smoke, Mirrors, and the Disappearance of Polio. And so as she gets into each of these vaccines and the history of it and so forth, then she goes into detail and she gives you references. She's not just going to throw a bunch of stuff at you. She's going to give you some references, and so she does very well at it. And there's one other lady, again, who is an MD, and she is a DO. Her name is Dr. Tenpenny, and you can, just like it sounds, Tenpenny, Tenpenny, and she's got a good educational background, and she likewise came to the conclusion that the vaccines were not good, and so she makes her presentation based on documents from the Center for Disease Control. Her whole presentation's on that. So when you see Dr. Tenpenny's on there, all you have to do is go on and type in Dr. Tenpenny, and it will bring up, and the CDC, and so the documents and information she presents is from the Center for Disease Control. Now, I've grown to distrust them, and in our program today, we don't have time to go into that, but I am, for the next broadcast, I want to, or the next presentation, I want to start out by the CDC thing, because it also leads into the other issue that I told you about, the MMR, and supposedly this guy was discredited, that he was a fraud and a fake, and he was only doing things for money and all that, which is now proven not to be true. Now, there is one other book I want to mention to you, and this book was written way back in 1987. This is an interesting doctor, MD, out of Illinois. He taught medicine for a while at the University of Chicago. He was on the medical board, the state medical board, for licensing in Illinois, but he was too honest. And so many years ago, he wrote a book called The Confessions of a Medical Heretic. And he became a thorn in the side to the medical establishment because he was very honest. And so, in The Confessions of the Medical Heretic, he talked a lot about his original training and how his eyes got opened as he was going through training of the way things were done that he wasn't real happy about anyhow. But he tried to improve the medical profession. I know he believed in it to a degree. And he wrote this book in 1987 called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. And in that, he raises the issue of vaccinations. And so you might want to read the book because it's still timely today, especially about raising a healthy child. And he's saying you basically need to take charge of your child's health, and here's some ways you can do that. Now, he had written another book too called The Medical Male Practice, M-A-L-E, and his whole hypothesis is that modern medicine exploits women and women's issues and have turned it into a very lucrative profession of doing that. And so, as I say, he debated people on the vaccination thing, other doctors on television, and then he started being called as a witness when a lot of the people in the natural health field were being legally harassed by the medical establishment. They tried very hard to keep natural medicine from coming to the foreground in this country. Way back there was a license in pretty much every state, as far as I know, for naturopathic medicine or natural medicine. Well, because it was growing, medicine considered it to be a threat to their monopoly and their income. And so they set out to wipe it out. Florida was one of the states that they were able to get it shut down so no new naturopaths could be licensed. And so I know a good bit about the background of here in Florida, what happened. And it was not necessarily pretty what happened, but nonetheless, bottom line is they got in several states. It made illegal, it was a crime to treat people, in fact a felony to treat people by natural methods. And so there was a big hassle about it. And so he debated a lot of these doctors, and he decided that he would testify on behalf of natural medicine in some of the cases, because what the medicine would do, even though you were a naturopath, they wanted to charge you with practicing medicine, even though you weren't practicing medicine, and put you out of business, basically. Either put you in jail so you would not do it, or fine you, or threaten you and make a trade off, a plea bargain. If you plead guilty, we won't put you in jail, but you won't ever be able to work doing natural medicine. So a lot of that was going on. And so I had an acquaintance out in Iowa that in Nebraska, he had an office. He was right on the border, and he had an office over in Nebraska, and so at one point they jumped on him. And so I suggested, knowing what Dr. Mendelsohn, what his ideas were and his willingness to defend it, that he should call him in for the hearing. And so he did. He went and testified on behalf of this gentleman I knew. And then another case came up in Georgia where another friend of mine was being harassed. He was issued an order to cease and desist. And at one time, Georgia was a place where they actually licensed naturopaths. And so I told my friend, after he was bilked of a lot of money by some doctors, some attorneys who said they could defend him, which when I saw what they planned to do, I said, it won't work. You better handle the case yourself, and you probably should call in Dr. Mendelsohn as an expert witness. Well, he went ahead and paid a lot of money, and when it was all done, he got nothing for his money. So he called me one day and says, you're right, I am going to go ahead and because a hearing was coming up, and he said, I am going to handle it myself. And so I said, well, be sure and get Dr. Mendelsohn. Well, he did, and Dr. Mendelsohn agreed to come over and testify. But an interesting thing happened. Dr. Mendelsohn suddenly mysteriously died, and he could not come and testify, but my friend was able to prevail anyhow. Based on other information I had given him, he was able to prevail. So I'm saying all that to say that Dr. Mendelsohn was a friend of patients and good health, and was not afraid to speak out when he saw that something was not right. So you may want to read that book for your own benefit, or all his books. I used to keep one in the office, The Confessions of a Medical Heretic, just because he gave a broader view of medicine and the training to be into medicine, and I don't have time to get into some of the stuff, but if you read his material, it's good. And if you want the one in particular on the vaccination, the one How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor is a good one to read. I guess I've expended my time as usual, but I hope I've laid enough foundation to get you started. I'm thinking this is probably going to be at least 3 sessions. As you can see, we spent a lot of time already just kind of giving you an introduction to the whole realm, but I wanted you to kind of get a feeling of the different issues, and they're going to come up more and more because the pro-vaccine people believe that everybody should be forced to be vaccinated, whether they want it or not, both adults and children. And what you're going to find out is that maybe they're not as effective by medicine's own admission. And they're wondering why. But so what we'll discuss those two issues again: safety and effectiveness, and are the vaccines effective? Now we're going to say maybe, and maybe in some cases, but there's a lot of evidence now. You know, there's nothing more powerful than an object lesson, and so when you have a mini epidemic of, say, whooping cough, and you find out that maybe 90-some% of the people who get the whooping cough were vaccinated already, and most of them twice, that begins to raise a question. And then not bother to mention how many unvaccinated people got it. Because what is happening is, and I'm just going to throw this in, that in most of these mini epidemics that are popping up, the unvaccinated people, less of them get the disease than the people who have been vaccinated. And in some cases, a very high percentage of the vaccinated people get it. And it's not just whooping cough, it's mumps and measles also, that so far, that have popped up, and that the vaccinated people aren't getting so far. And of talk about, to me, of all the stupid arguments, well, it's because of the unvaccinated people that our people got it. I don't know. There's something missing there, I guess, that I'm missing, because if the vaccination is effective, then regardless of whether anybody else is vaccinated or not, the only person at risk is the person unvaccinated if the vaccination is effective. I leave you to think about that as we call this to a close. But as I say, I hope I've given you enough introductory stuff to get you thinking. I would go and see Dr. Tenpenny's presentation from the CDC documents, and I would see Dr. Suzanne Humphrey's presentation, which is very, very powerful in the sense that she's done her homework well. This is a very brilliant lady, and when she saw what to her was truth, she felt compelled to have to do something about it and to talk about it, and that's what she does. So I think you will know, I mean, she has more than those two, but there's two of them that is her basic reasoning why she is opposed to vaccinations. Okay, so otherwise, I hope I've given you enough to get you started thinking, and don't push the panic button. Don't run out screaming and carrying on, and don't be intimidated either. And if anybody asks, I mean, there's nothing wrong in saying, you know, I've got to look into this some more. I want to see both sides before I make my decision. And I think that's a very valid way to do it. Getting back to this other free book, which you can, as I say, get on internet, Don't Vaccinate Before You Educate, and you should be able to get a free copy. I think it's like 150 pages or something like that. And he kind of talks about legalities and a lot of things about vaccination, and then puts it in your lap. You know, you make your decision. And then we'll go back the next time. We'll talk about the CDC, because I think that's really important. And then we will talk a little bit about the history of vaccines and in general, and the men who were the original individuals who have been held in high esteem for what they have done. Now, maybe because of what I know, I might not hold them in as high esteem as others may. But in any case, we'll talk about it, and again, you can reach your own conclusions. Now, I do want you to know that this is not a new problem. From the very beginning, when just smallpox came along, and the vaccine, or the vaccination, they weren't manufacturing vaccines back then. They were actually doing direct vaccination, and we'll talk about that. And you'll find out, of course, that the smallpox vaccine really was not made from smallpox. The people that received true smallpox for a vaccination many of them got sick and died from the vaccination. So we're going to talk about, and I'll just throw it out, it really was cowpox, and then it was something else, and the something else is kind of strange or interesting. And we will tell you that, well, I'll save it for next time. We're out of time. We've gone over, as usual. So be thinking about all of this, and I will then, the next week, come up with number 2, that will get into more of the meat instead of the sauce part of it, and see where we go from there. It was nice being with you again. Until our next video, be healthy.